A pleasant good morning to all, and welcome to the officials from the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts, and the Auditor General's Department. I am Devendranath Tanku, Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. For reference and information, the Public Accounts Committee has a mandate to consider and report to the House on A, appropriation accounts of monies expended out of sums granted by Parliament to meet the public expenditure of Trinidad and Tobago. B, such other accounts as may be referred to the committee by the House of Representatives or as are authorized or required to be considered by the committee under any other enactment. And C, the report of the Auditor General on any such accounts, and whether policy is carried out efficiently, effectively, and economically, and whether expenditure conforms to the authority which governs it. The purpose of the Public Accounts Committee today is to have a discussion with ministries, departments, and agencies on the administering of government grants with reference to the concerns raised in the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ended 30th of September 2021, and to determine the challenges faced in the administering of grants and possible solutions to mitigate these challenges going forward. Based on the issues identified, the following key stakeholders have been invited to today's discussion: the Auditor General's Department, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts. Please note that this meeting is being broadcast live on the Parliament's Channel 11, on Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners are invited to send their comments and questions related to today's inquiry via email parl101@ttparliament.org, via Facebook at ttparliament/ttparliament, or via Twitter at ttparliament. All participants are advised that their microphones should remain muted until recognized by the chair to contribute. I now invite members of the committee present here today of the Public Accounts Committee to introduce yourselves and to the members of the public and to your attendees here today. Members, committee members, I turn over to you.
Yes, good morning. My name is Adrian Leons. I'm a committee member.
Good morning. My name is Sharice Sipasad. I'm a member of the Public Accounts Committee. Welcome to everybody.
Good morning, everyone. I am Ayana Webster, member of the committee.
All right, I know we also have with us Member Julian John, who is the Deputy Chair of the Public Accounts Committee.
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you. I want to now invite other representatives here today to introduce yourselves, beginning with the Auditor General's Department, then continue to the Ministry of Finance, then the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and then the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Arts. So let's begin with the introductions from the Auditor General's Department.
Good morning, Chair, and to the members of the committee and all those who are invited to attend this meeting. I am Laurie Pujadas, Auditor General, and I will turn over to my team members to introduce themselves at this point in time. Thank you, Chair.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Riola Balu. I am Acting Assistant Auditor General.
Good morning, everyone. I am Neela Dwarka Ali, Audit Director.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Diana Raghunath, Acting Audit Executive 1.
Good morning. My name is Neela Sukra, Acting Audit Supervisor.
Okay, so now it's the turn of the Ministry of Finance to introduce yourselves, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman,
members of the Public Accounts Committee. This is Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Finance, Joycelyn Thomas Villamosa, representing on behalf of the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance. I'll now like to introduce the other members of my team. I'll allow them to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman. My name is Enid Zeppelin. I am the Director of the Strategic Management and Execution Office in the Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dexter Jagannath. I am the Program Manager at the Strategic Management and Execution Office, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, everyone. Taylor Guerra, Senior Project Manager, Strategic Management and Execution Office, Ministry of Finance.
May I now invite the representatives from the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services to introduce yourselves.
Good morning, everyone. Jacqueline Johnson, Permanent Secretary here.
Good morning. Jennifer Harvey-Better, Acting Director of Finance and Office.
Good morning, Chair and everyone. Rollins Jaira, Founding Executive too.
Good morning, everyone. This is John Guy, Acting Director of Social Welfare.
Good morning, everyone. Carla McKee, Auditor 2.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Kane, ICT Director.
Good morning, everyone. Ronald Laurie, Director of Monitoring Evaluation.
Good morning, everyone. Rhonda Francis, Head of Investigations and Compliance.
Thank you all very much. May I now invite members from the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts to introduce yourselves.
Good morning, Chairman, and other members of the committee, and everyone else on Secretary General too. I'm representing the Permanent Secretary, who is out of the country right now, and the other team members will introduce themselves. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am Simone Medina Williams, Acting Senior Research Officer at the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts.
Morning, everyone. I am Michael Murray, Cultural Program Coordinator, Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts.
Damian Richardson, Acting Director of Culture Division.
Thank you all very, very much, and welcome to the Public Accounts Committee. Welcome to this session where we will be asking you all several questions, seeking to get clarifications and information that we can use to clarify our concerns with regards to the award of grants. I want to now invite the Auditor General's department, but the Auditor General who's here, to make a brief opening statement. Over to you, ma'am. The floor is open.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, for inviting the Auditor General and my team to discuss the concerns which we have reported in the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of Trinidad and Tobago. As you know, Section 161 of the Constitution has provided us with the mandate to review the financials of ministries and departments with regard to the public accounts. Through you, Chair, I just want to draw the committee's attention to chart 3.1 of our report, which is at page 75 of our report. I just want to draw your attention as to the focus on the administration of grants and where that was placed in our endeavors. If you will observe in the chart there, you would see that 40% of the outflows of government expenditure for the year 2021 was expended under current transfers and subsidies. The Ministry of Social Development and Family Services is a ministry that is one of the key ministries that support expenditure under this particular subhead. In fact, the ministry accounts for 23% of the expenditure expended under the subhead current transfers and subsidies. And of that, 95% of the ministry's expenditure is expended through the administration of grants. So within that context is one of the reasons that we sought to look at how the data, the integrity of the data for the processing of grants was undertaken. I would also like to draw to your attention that this is something that we have been doing over the years since 2026. We have looked, 2016, my apologies, since 2016, we have been looking at the different grants and how the processes have been done through electronic means as well as through their manual processes. So you may have noted, for example, in our 2016 report, we had made some comments with regard to the senior citizens pension in terms of the manual processing that they do. And we also made mention in terms of the general controls that is surrounding the data processing of these things. So we continued in this year and last year as well to look at this because grants is a significant portion of expenditure. And so we are appreciative of the PAC taking the opportunity at this point in time to get further updates from the ministries involved as to what forms of improvement they have undertaken since the admission of our report. And because at the end of the day, we all together would want to be better organizations and, to improve our processes. So we thank the committee for inviting us, and we look forward to hearing what have been undertaken thus far by the various entities that you have invited here today. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I want to now invite the Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance to make a brief opening statement.
Good morning once again. It is well known that the government of Trinidad and Tobago during the heights of the pandemic would have instituted lockdown measures in order to control the spread of the virus. And in so doing, and in recognition of the hardship that persons who would have lost employment and suffered temporary layoffs and so on, in recognition of the hardship they would have faced, a policy decision was taken to financially assist those persons who suffered such loss. And the period April to June 2020, grants would have been provided, the salary relief grant in particular would have been provided for persons who were registered under the NIS system. This was later extended for the May to June 2021 period. The process has been ongoing and it is significantly complete. We are now nearing completion of the payments of those grants. And we would like to say that we did review the comments of the Auditor General in its report on the public accounts for financial year 2021. And we consulted with the administrator of the facility, which was the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago, and also the Salary Relief Grant Command Center that was set up in order to respond to those comments. And we are pleased once again this morning to be given the opportunity to participate in this meeting and provide further updates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Permanent Secretary. May I now invite the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. We are indeed grateful for this opportunity to have this constructive dialogue based on the Auditor General's report. The ministry continues its transformation initiatives aimed at streamlining its services in the interests of those who we serve, that vulnerable group of our society. Some of the things we're going to discuss here in terms of the remedy are well advanced, and we hope that during the discussion that we have the comments and opinions of members of the PAC so that we can further engage in bringing to fruition the remedies we have put in place to address some of the issues raised in this report. We look forward to this discussion. I thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. May I now invite the Acting Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts to make a brief opening statement.
Yes, thank you. The cultural and creative industries combine the creative and production and commercialization of creative content that are intangible and of cultural nature. And these depend almost entirely on person-to-person interaction for the production and proliferation. With the COVID-19, this impact reduced the artist's ability to perform and earn a living via conventional means. It therefore became important for us to develop mechanisms to buffer and protect and preserve the livelihood of the artistic community. So the emergency relief grant for artists and creative was administered by the Ministries of Community Development, Culture and the Arts, and following the merger in September 2020 by the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts. The one-off grant was in the sum of $5,000 to artists and creative who would have lost income due to cancelled exhibition, classes, conferences, workshops, and other cultural related events. This, of course, would have been a direct result of the mitigation effect to mitigate COVID-19 and its spread. A total of $25 million was allocated to the entity to meet these payments, and to date, a total of 4,281 persons would have received grants. So the ministry is able and present here to answer any question, and we will continue to work towards alleviating the burden experienced by artists and creators. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much to all representatives who would have spoken. The format that we propose to adopt in this inquiry is the chairman, that is myself, will ask some general questions, and then we'll have other members of the committee delve into the specific programs and therefore some specific questions which would have arisen based on the reading of the Auditor General's report, specifically on the administration of government grants. Colleagues, if you may allow me, the Auditor General's report highlighted some serious concerns about some discrepancies found in the award of these grants. Some of them were small in terms of the numbers of queries, and some of them were very large in terms of the number of queries, and some were small in terms of the number of funds involved, but some were substantial. I mean, there was one instance in which I believe upwards of $700,000, $886,000 was the subject of a query based on information that did not gel right with what was required. On the basis of that, the Auditor General's report identified specific issues requiring attention. And I know that from between when the Auditor General's report was submitted and now, some adjustments would have and should have been made to ensure that those matters have been investigated properly. And as a result, when we meet today at this session, we should be able to find answers to the queries raised by the Auditor General and raised by your committee from here on going in. On the basis of that, I have a couple of questions that I want to forward to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, specifically to the Permanent Secretary who is here. Permanent Secretary who is here. What is the Ministry's general assessment, given the Auditor General's report for 2021? What is the Ministry's general assessment of its level of preparedness to treat with fraud risk in administering grants at the beginning of the financial year 2021? Madam Permanent Secretary.
Chair, the ministry is aware that there are some issues with regard to the payment of all its grants. We have seen the emergence of fraud in every one of the grants that we pay here, including the ones that we paid during COVID, as well as grants that we paid related to our disaster management program. The ministry has put in place quite a number of mechanisms to mitigate against fraud outside of the usual process that we have employed that are in the regulations to deal with referring matters of fraud to the police, to treating with staff who might have been involved in that kind of activity to the Service Commission for Discipline. We have installed in fiscal 2021 an investigation and compliance unit within the ministry to do investigation, which would support the efforts of the police service to address the compliance issues with regard to ensuring that divisions and members of staff comply with the existing regulations in the public service, in particular the financial regulations and the financial instructions, as well as other procedures and policies applicable to the administration of grants. We have also engaged more actively our internal audit unit to look at some of the gaps in our processes and in our systems. The ministry has also tried its best to ensure that proper supervision exists in various divisions involved in the administration of our grant system. And as a measure, ensure that our local service delivery agents, such as the social welfare division, are more vigilant in identifying possible opportunities available for defrauding the system. So those are some of the core areas that we have been focusing on in fiscal 2021. We are also implementing an IT framework platform that would allow us to detect illegal transactions in our system. We are also working with many of our key stakeholders, including the Bankers Association, the Central Bank, the NIB, the First Citizens Bank, to look at the gaps in the system to ensure that they become, to ensure that we fill them procedurally or via policy or via legislation. So we are also looking at alternative mechanisms that would allow us to eliminate payments by checks. So we get a system of card payment, and our information technology that we are now putting in, and we are well advanced there. We are now at the model office stage where we are actually training and running the application to address the many of the gaps identified by the Auditor General, some of which, well, she said 2016, but some of them date back to 2002 in terms of the administration of the grant system. And finally, we are also looking at amending our legislation to treat with some of the gaps that we see in the system that exposes the ministry to fraud and illegal transactions.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Ma'am, you referenced the increased use or sharpening up of your internal audit unit and an investigation and compliance unit that has now been set up. Can you advise if both of those units are now fully staffed to ensure that we have maximum attention being paid in ensuring that fraud risk is a thing of the past?
Chairman, I would say that we need some additional staff in our audit unit. The Treasury Division has identified the need for an Auditor 3, and we are pursuing that with the Ministry of Public Administration. We have recruited quite a bit of persons for our investigation and compliance unit. We've the leads and several of the key positions, including the legal unit, We are still engaged in recruiting some additional investigators and compliance officers to support the unit. The unit is up and running and investigations are ongoing.
Thank you, ma'am. But what this indicates then, though, is that we still have some gaps which exist because of a shortage of manpower. Now, given that these are not necessarily establishment posts, can you advise what is your level of, well, during what time, give me a deadline when you think and hope that both units will be fully staffed so that you will be able to administer this thing properly?
We are hoping to complete the staffing of the ICU unit within the next 4 weeks. We are in our final stages of interviewing the investigators and some compliance officers. Our audit unit, that is our Auditor 3, is an established position, and that has to go to the PMCD, it has to go to the cabinet, it has to be scheduled as a traveling position. So that's a creation of an additional post on the establishment. That will take some time, sir, and I would estimate that that could take about 3 or 6 months to 6 months.
Thank you. Madam Permanent Secretary, can you advise your committee of the numbers of persons still, number of positions that you are still awaiting to be filled for both the internal audit unit and the investigation and compliance unit? Can you advise us the number of persons?
We have a full audit unit at this point in time. What we were asking for, based on the Treasury's recommendation, is an additional position of Auditor 3, given the quantum of money that we spend here on grants. We spend nearly $5 million, and we agreed that an Auditor 3 instead of an Auditor 2 ought to lead that internal audit division. So outside of that addition, the audit unit is fully staffed at this point in time. The ICU unit, I don't have the exact figure, but I could supply that to you. We still need to have quite a few more investigators on the ground. I believe that we are interviewing this week for the remaining next week for the remaining investigators and compliance officers. I can ask Ms. Francis to just give me a brief on the amounts that we have to include. Ms. Francis, could you give me?
Good morning, Chairman Shreyu. We have 10 investigators to be recruited, which we expect to complete recruitment, as the PS indicated, within the next 4 weeks. We have 2 forensic accounting officers also to be recruited, and 1 cybercrime analyst still to be recruited.
Ma'am, are you not concerned that given that the Auditor General's report was done a while ago, a substantial while ago, and some of these matters would have been discovered, some of these fraudulent activities, for whatever reason, would have been determined and discovered, hopefully by yourselves, even prior to the Auditor General's report, that we have taken a substantial amount of time before we having gotten this unit established? You're speaking of about 13 persons at the ICU unit still to be recruited. Are you not concerned that we have spent a lot of time and therefore a lot more expenditure of funds, etc., may have been undertaken, but we still have not had this unit established at this point?
Chairman, I would agree with you, but it's not for want of not trying to recruit cyber crime analysts and forensic persons. It's not a skill that you find out there. We have looked, we did have some interviews with regard to filling these positions. Those persons did not pan out for us. And therefore we even considered before we went back out to advertise whether we can go the alternative way of finding a firm to provide the services. So it's not for want of not trying. That unit has around 31 people. We still have to fill about 13 more of the positions, and the work continues within the division. But I would agree that we really ought to focus heavily on filling the remaining 13 positions within the unit. It was not the original intention to fill all 31 positions immediately, but to fill the positions as the work develops. This is a new unit in the ministry, and therefore based on the strategy, we indicated that we will fill as much as we can given the current workload, and as things develop, we will proceed with filling the other positions.
Thank you, ma'am. But of course, you would agree that at the start of this process is where much of the weaknesses in the transparency and in the possibility of fraud, much of those weaknesses would have existed over the last couple of years. Therefore, the filling of that, the complete filling of those units should have been the priority, not just the partial filling, but the complete filling of it. Because as you go forward, I'm hoping that you would have found ways to close the gaps, to remove the risk and the potential for fraud, so that the incidence of fraudulent activity or mistakes on the process would have been less. Because right now, your investigation and compliance unit should have had the most instances of alleged fraudulent activity because of the fact that the system initially was weak and it's now being built up. So I'm saying that just to say that maybe we need to focus much more on filling the entire unit to ensure that we have full compliance and investigation at this point, so that we don't have a greater need for it down the road. If you do this thing right, in my view, ma'am, you will be able to treat with the problems now for investigation and compliance, and therefore have less need for investigation and compliance support as you move forward, because much more of the gaps would have been identified and filled. So that is just a recommendation. But I also want to go back to something else you indicated, that when we were talking about the level of preparedness to deal with fraud risk, you indicated that some members of staff and some applicants had been referenced to the police and other legal units. Can you give us an idea of the number of persons involved, the number of members of staff, and the number of individuals who may have been participating in what could have been a fraudulent activity, who are now engaging the attention of the legal services and the police service?
The numbers at the police service is pretty large, and some of them have been under investigation for quite a long time. We have close to about 31 cases that we have referred in fiscal 2021 to the police. For issues relating to staff, we have approximately 8 members of staff who have been engaged in some form of activity that warrants a proper investigation, and those are with the commission.
So in total, you have some 39 odd members in police investigations going on with regards to fraudulent activity at the MSDFS. Is that correct to say?
Chair, I'm specifically referring to those that were referred under my remit There were others there before that we get updates on every now and then from the police as the investigation progresses.
Thank you very much. I am a bit concerned though that you have had some from before. Would you be able to give us an idea of the numbers of instances that would have been forwarded to the police service before, based on the same administration of government grants, but before your period, before 2021?
And we can do a count for you, sir. Can I submit that in writing? A lot of them related to the encashment of checks at the ministry, senior citizens pension at supermarkets. Those are under investigation. We also have instances where we have fictitious payments to elderly homes. We have matters which were dealt with disaster payments, which may have been fraudulent, which are also under investigation. Fiscal 2021. So do I make that submission to you, sir?
You can submit it. You can submit it to the committee at the secretariat here.
Thank you.
I'm advised that the secretariat will send you a formal communication requesting the specifics, and you can then respond to that accordingly. If I may move on briefly, in the ministerial response to the second report of the Public Accounts Committee on an examination of the report of the Auditor General for the financial year 2021, the MSDFS explained, with regards to the pandemic relief payments, that it had made great strides in the overall process for the disbursement of pandemic targeting relief. You also indicated that you well, the question I have is whether the implementation of an online program, an online application, whether that has been, it is at now, whether that has been done, and if it has been done or whatever stage we are at now, whether it is working to ensure that we have a proper, efficient system that deals with some of the issues and the gaps that would have been identified by the Auditor General.
Chairman, for phase 2, we moved from a manual process to a online application process, which allowed us to do further interrogation of the applications, liaise with the Ministry of Finance to remove the possibility of duplicate payment. That system was done and developed through iGov. We have not continued the development of that system, sir. One of the reasons why is because we are engaged in the implementation of the integrated social enterprise management information system here. And that system, along with some of the other transformation initiatives at the ministry, including the design and implementation of a vulnerability register, will address the gaps we have seen emerging in COVID-1 and COVID-2. Now, the systems we are building is supposed to treat with any shocks in the economy, which would require the Ministry of Social Development to respond urgently by making payments that are urgent and temporary. So that is the system that we are focusing on right now, that we are building, that would allow us to identify those people who may become vulnerable as a result of a shock in the economy like COVID, make arrangements for them to be easily identified and paid via the new platform. The Ministry of Social Development, therefore, will become the repository of those payments that would hopefully treat with the payment of grants from one source in the public service, as opposed to what we have seen with COVID, several agencies of government making payments to grants for persons who are considered to have been made vulnerable as a result of the shock in the economy. So that's what we're developing.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I have some more questions, but I would want to open the floor to my other colleagues who would have questions. I would like to proceed based on the individual support program, individual grant, item by item, grant by grant. And if necessary, we can then do the general questions as well. I know my colleague, Member Leonce, has a question that he wants to ask. So if I could take Mr. Leonce first, and then we'll deal with Mr. Prasad and Ms. Webster-Roy in that order. Mr. Leonce.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you, I want to just stick in on the food support program. In the Auditor General's report, in paragraph 358, spoke about the addresses of applicants who were not included in the data. Therefore, audit was unable to determine whether more than one member of a household was in receipt of a grant. I just wanted to ask quickly, one, how do we filter due to the addresses to ensure that more than one person in a household is not accessing the grant? And two, how are we able to assess persons who live in cluster type arrangements where they share the same addresses? And three, how do we use that information when there are persons that seek lodging by persons who access the grant? Let's say they stay in a room. I'm aware of persons in my constituency who would have suffered by fire, and they seek lodging. They got assistance by persons who also access the grant, which they share in one household, and they are both in need. How do we treat with those three type scenarios? Thank you.
Excellent question, Madam Permanent Secretary.
Household grant. So it's not given, it's not an individual grant like the pension or disability. It is applied and based on the size and paid based on the size of the household. So the data on the system that we might have been missing maybe it's not on the system for several reasons. It's in an application, a manual application. A food support grant application process begins with an assessment of the household, the income of the household, based on the number of members in that household. So that information is captured using a standard means test is worked out to indicate whether the applicant who is applying on behalf of the household is eligible for a food support grant. Now, we're looking at, I think we need to distinguish here what we currently have in place, what we are putting in place, because what we call our SSCMS, which is the current database that we're using to report on payments is not an interactive system. In fact, it is the manual data that we took and put into that system. So it doesn't capture everything. And we recognize that we did have an error in terms of moving that data from the manual files to that database that we are currently using as a reporting mechanism. So the data on that was captured in a data transfer exercise that which we are agreeing that the transfer files to the electronic version that we designed to store the data may not have been properly done because we saw the absence of the peer review in the entry of the information. Data was entered wrong. We know for example, the Auditor General's report identified several of these inconsistencies in terms of date of birth, etc. So we are aware that that system is not, may not carry 100% accurate data on our client. The food support grant, as I indicated, is a household grant, and it's based on a manual application process. For you to become a permanent food support payee, you need to supply certain information to us for final assessment, and we need to visit your household to confirm the data we've captured from you on that manual form. So the site visit is important in determining what is placed on that form, and that has to be confirmed by a social welfare advisor. Cluster type arrangements are determined on site visits. So you may have, yes, persons affected by a fire, and inside of one building, you might have 2 or 3 households inside of there. And we have seen that all the while, but they are doing their own separate meal preparation, etc., within that facility. And that is what our social welfare advisors would consider when they look at the visits, when they go out to do their visits to confirm the information they have taken on the manual document. So those are some of the things that we do to verify and validate the information that we capture manually.
Thank you. Yes, sorry. Is it then that some modification would be done in terms of how you capture the data in terms of recording it on the system for those particular instances?
What we have done is our new platform allows us to capture a lot more information. That is the interactive digital system that we are going to work with as soon as we have completed our testing and our model office setup. Now, that captures information at the individual and the household level. So that database will be able to tell us exactly what is the size of the household, as well as capture long-term the dynamic changes in the household in the future. And that would influence how you are paid and how much you are paid as a client of the ministry. It is not it's not like the current database, which is built on a platform to merely capture data related to payments. Yeah? So the new system, which would remedy a lot of these things, is really very interactive. It is paperless, unless you have things to attach to the file and notes to put in there. So it is very distinct and separate and apart from that old system, which we put into place since 2010, but only transferred data to it around 2015. And as I said, we recognize the fact that the data input had its challenges, and therefore a lot of data cleansing has to be done now to that data in order to move it to the new system. And we have engaged in data cleansing since 2021 to clean up the current database.
And thank you so very much, PS. Just one last question. When do you estimate that this data cleansing activity would be brought current in terms of where we are?
Right now, through you, Chair, we have 11 local boards that we are working with, in addition to 3 or 4 core delivery units of our ministry, and we are putting in the data into the current system, cleaning it using a methodology that would allow peer review of that data to ensure its accuracy from the referencing the manual files. Another phase of that would involve scanning the file onto the new system. What we have done with the vendor recently is sort of try and negotiate a program that would allow us to bring across the data into the new system so that we can engage in its use, but also simultaneously engage in data cleansing. So far, we have completed 4 of the 11 service centers. We hope to complete another 4 within 2 to 4 weeks. And then we will treat with the others, which will take us to sometime at the end of the year or January for data cleanup. We do not anticipate everything will be done in terms of the data cleanup by January, and therefore we will continue to use our business intelligence system on the new platform to ensure that all the data is properly cleansed. And that is an option we have when we build a new system, to use the business intelligence there to see where there are gaps in the data. And a lot of that was identified in the Auditor General's report. Our current system does not allow us to really use the business intelligence to identify the gaps. It does in some places, but the ISINs that we are going to, the new platform, would allow us to use more of that to ensure that the data is well maintained and there are no gaps in any of the fields that we are working with.
Thank you very much, PS, and Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you. Madam Permanent Secretary, I am extremely concerned that we have taken so long and we are still not clean. We have still not been able to break the back, as it were, of this data cleanup exercise. Can you advise how many applications or how many, I'm trying to gauge the volume of what we are looking at, which would have taken from the time of discovery to date to January, and still not be sure that we have captured all the issues and the information. Can you give us an idea of what is the volume of applications that we are treating with, the volume of information that we are treating with, so that we can get a better idea as to why it is taking as long as it is taking to have this process, the data transfer exercise and the verification system properly done, so we actually have a working, functional body of knowledge that the ministry can draw from, that can reflect the realities of the need for grants on the outside. Can you give us an idea of the size of the data entry process that we are looking at?
Chairman, we have in excess of 200 pieces of data here to be treated with. while we're doing data cleansing, we are also dealing with a lot of queries, because while it may sound as a very straightforward, we have some challenges inside of there. Our manual, we have to locate the manual files. Some of these files date back to the 60s and 70s, and some of those people are still pensioners. For example, we have to verify data. We have to ask the client in some cases to come to us, as you would have seen in our advertisement in the newspaper, encouraging persons to come in with their information so that we could properly populate the database. So there's a lot of challenges involved in the data cleansing process. It's over 200 pieces of files that we need to treat with. It's not only the core grants like pension, disability, and public assistance and food support, but it's also grants that we offer in terms of house repair, plumbing, community care for the elderly. Those have to be included there. Data relating to what we pay as subventions to NGOs. So it's a pretty broad cleanup and digital system, digitalization system. We have to bring all the manual data onto the system. Yeah, and as I said earlier, when we started we had a lot of queries. You were going into files and you were not seeing copies of an ID card, for example, and you would need to get the client to come in to bring one. We're using the new digital format of the birth certificate so that we could capture a PIN number. A lot of people don't have the digital format of the birth certificate, and they would now need to go and get that and bring it back to us. A lot of people don't have the new ID cards that are set out in the year of birth, and we need to send them to get those because the ID card for us is a unique identifier. So there's a lot of things happening. We started off with 46,000 queries. We've dropped that to 13, and that is evidence that we have been working at ensuring that the data, the vacant data fields capture the information that we want. So I can ask through you, Chair, Mr. Kane can give us some rough data on the volume that we're looking at and where we are in terms of cleaning the data.
Good day, Chair. So we have actually completed over 52,000 records. That's totally completed, validated, and certified. We have approximately, as Pierre stated, we have about 13,000 under the query status that we are actively working on. Outstanding in terms of still to be done is just over 119,000. But they are not all the same type of records. So we have seen that the NSDP records are a little bit more straightforward. The social welfare files are the ones that are challenging and in-depth. Right? So just as the PS said, just a note, when we say completed, we mean that they have been validated, they have been peer-reviewed. So we're making sure that the process is done, it's probably a little bit slower, but it's done properly. So we're looking at getting the type of quality that is needed to ensure that the records are accurate.
Thank you very much, sir. It is of great concern to your committee that 119,000 are still left to be done out of 200,000. But that's just for note at this point. I want to invite Member Webster Roy. I know that a member had some questions that she wanted to raise. Member?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you to the Permanent Secretary, Social Development and Family Services. In her initial response to you, in terms of some of the deficiencies identified by the Auditor General's report, she would have indicated that the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services is currently considering amendments to the legislation to improve the administration of the grants, as well as to have a more robust system in place for the way they issue the grants and the services. I wanted the Permanent Secretary to share with us what are some of the possible amendments they are considering and how that would ensure that we have greater efficiency within the system, please.
Chair, we are engaged in the amendments to the grants legislation, the senior citizens pension. We are also reviewing the public assistance grants, the disability grant as well. We are also looking at other pieces of legislation which impact payment and the possibility of illegal transactions here, including the act treating with the elderly in our country. With specific reference to those that are well advanced, like the change amendments to the senior citizens pension, we are making every effort there to reduce the possibility of paying, changing checks at supermarkets and post offices and that sort of things, because we see that there's a lot of possible fraud emerging with the changing of checks at some of those agencies. So we would want to consider removing that, and we have been working with other agencies in the banking sector and the central bank to look at alternative payments to checks. We have been pushing things like the direct deposit to your bank account, with the hope of reducing the amount of checks that we are printing on a monthly basis, and that is going pretty nice. We already have 71% of our pensioners going towards direct deposit, and that is very encouraging for us. So our check printing numbers are reducing every month. We also are tightening up on some of the requirements for pension. We want to insist that persons who are eligible for that grant are indeed living in Trinidad and Tobago and are ordinarily resident in the country. So that's a major amendment in that area as well. With regard to the public assistance, we're trying to do the same thing there, streamline the payment. We are also trying to include in all the legislation areas where we need to have information from key public sector agencies like the NIB and the Immigration Department, so that we could streamline our processing of application for grants to ensure that we are targeting the right people. We are also treating with some of the areas that may be outside the remit of the social welfare officer to investigate, particularly persons who may be misleading the board in terms of supplying information. And so those particular application requires detailed investigation. Good examples are persons who have business and are seeking the pension and may have done something that shows us that they are no longer business persons or no longer involved in the business, and would want to take advantage of the pension. So there's a lot of things that are changing in the legislation that would allow us to target the people who are vulnerable and in need of the grant at all levels.
Thank you, Madam Pierce. Madam Pierce, one other question. In terms of the issuing of food support, I remember during the COVID period, food support, special food cards were issued out for children in school who are on the school feeding program through the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. However, there were instances where in some households where children who are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, but the parent who they're living with might not have been a citizen, would not have been able to benefit because the parent would not have had an ID card, a national ID card. Are there any considerations in terms of for those children who are vulnerable, who are indeed in need of food support, and because their parents may not have a national ID card, is there anything being considered in terms of legislation to factor in those children who are vulnerable?
Chair, this is something that we have deliberated on at the ministry. There is no reason to deny those children, so we recently made a decision to support those children. Our ministry uses the national ID card as the unique identifier. With the introduction by the Ministry of Digital Transformation of the unique identifier system, it would mean that we can easily identify persons as being Trinidadians and deserving of the help based on that new system. But in the interim, we have taken the decision at the ministry to support persons who do not have an ID card, but they are the parent of children who are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And that has been worked out recently with a case of a father not being a national, but the child is a Trinidadian and in need of help. The ministry has made the decision to support those children. So that's the new ruling and the new position of the ministry with regard to those children.
Thank you, Madam Pierce. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I turn over now to Member C. Prasad. Member.
Thank you, Chairman. Madam PS, you spoke about the challenges of recruiting cyber crime and other types of specialist forensic accounting officers, etc. Those are very, very specialized personnel. Is it the problem you're also addressing is the financial payments, the salaries being offered to these individuals that is causing some of the issues in recruiting your full complement of staff?
Chairman, that is quite correct. As you know, there's a procedure for remunerating persons on contract. We are guided by the Chief Personnel Officer in those matters. And the price of labor in those areas are very high. And that has been one of the reasons why persons are not willing to come on board with us. We have been engaging the CPO with a view to having those salaries raised. And he currently has a justification before him for persons in the compliance unit and the investigation unit, as well as us looking at exploring, what might be the other options available to the ministry to get that kind of service. So yes, yes, the remuneration package is also a major challenge for us.
Do you have a timeline on when this matter will be resolved? Because it seems to be an ongoing issue and it's not going to be solved unless you look at the remuneration package. I mean, that's just the facts of life. And the longer we wait, I guess the longer we have gaps being extended and the whole system will take that much longer to be sorted out.
Chair, we have reached the highest level and we're hoping to bring a resolution quickly.
Chairman, through you, listened to the members giving us information on the cleaning up of the records, 200,000 entities, and you still have 119,000 still to be done. Two questions. In the meantime, while you're doing the cleanup exercise, what steps, what procedures, etc., are in place to mitigate against ongoing mistakes, fraud, etc., being continued without us stopping it while we do the cleanup exercise?
Chair, we continue to do on the ground things like training, encouraging our staff to be cautious, careful in inputting data into the system. Those are some of the ongoing things that we have been addressing in the system as much as we can, because a lot of the errors are human errors. A lot of the errors reported by the Auditor General, when investigated, proved to be human error in inputting data. So a lot of on-the-ground caution and insisting that due attention be paid to the inputting of manual data on application form, data into the current database reporting system. These are some of the things that we currently do, as well as treat with, as I said, gaps in the information system as much as possible by going back to the client to get the information. We continue to investigate and pass files and documents to the investigation unit and the audit unit to investigate matters perceived to be an illegal transaction, or may have some fraud in it, or may have some human error in terms of the data. Those things are ongoing at the ministry.
Through you, Chairman, just another follow-up question. Does the database prevent you from uploading a file if you do not have all the information put in? Because that's normally how databases are. You can't complete the upload of the documents or the information unless you fill out all the data fields.
Chair, the system was designed somewhat like that in 2010. However, those things were dispensed with because the system did not develop beyond a storage system, a data storage system in 2016. However, our new platform that we are going to would create alerts of the nature that the member just described. So for example, if you put in an ID number and it's working out to be more than the 4 digits, 6 digits plus 3, the system will not take the data, and it will represent and tell you that something is wrong with the information you're putting in there. So the new system that we're going to has the validation processes built into it that would prevent erroneous data from being inputted into the system.
Madam Pierce, and you said that system will be fully implemented by January. That's what you had said, or is it my misinterpretation?
We hope to roll out in January, Chair. We are in the model office stage. We just finished the training with the vendor and iGov. We are now in the model office testing and ensuring that the policy, the legislation, the procedures are in place the model office phase is 3 months, and it is an office which operates as a service delivery center, not only a social welfare office, but a service delivery center. Once we have tweaked and managed and reviewed what the job entails and etc., we move to the implementation stage, and we're hoping to get there by January once our model office has carried out all the testing and the tweaking and the user acceptance, etc.
But that would not include 100% of all your files, because you still have 119,000 outstanding. Is that correct?
Yes, and as I said earlier, Chair, what we are trying to do now with the vendor, and we have to make a decision whether we want to continue data cleansing on the old system that we are using, or make a transfer to the new system and continue the data cleansing there. That's that we are making with the Ministry of Digital Transformation and iGov, including the vendor, to determine what is the best option. One of our challenges is that we don't have space at our local offices to expand our data cleansing through. And that's one of the we have maxed out the use of the space available in our local offices to deal with data cleansing. Yeah, we recently asked for a container to be set up at Aranguez in order to start the process there. We did not get permission to do that. So we have to utilize whatever space, boardrooms that we have in those offices there to get the data cleansing crew in, because they need access to the manual files. So that has been a challenge for us, and we've been trying to work around it as best as we can to ensure that we expedite the process. But as I said, a decision has to be made, and we're in discussions with the vendor, iGov and MDT, to see whether the option exists for us to transfer the data that we have and continue our cleanup exercise on the new platform.
And Madam, through you, Chairman, just finally, when would that decision be made?
The initial discussions were held yesterday with the vendor. Yesterday, yes, with the vendor. So we're hoping that they will come back to us with an option that we can consider.
I just have one comment, Chairman, if you permit me. Can I make a comment, Chairman?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Madam PS, given the sums involved and the number of records involved and the time since this has been going on, I find it extensive. And I honestly do not have in my mind a finite time. I guess I'm a time-driven person, and everything I write down has an end, some sort of conclusion. And I'm not getting that feeling, that information from you as to when this thing will be concluded and we could rely on the data in the system. And the sums involved are too large for us not to have a finite time frame to have everything in place. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Member. In expressing my own concern, and I'm sure my other colleagues will similarly speak for themselves, but my own concern that now we seem to have 3 or 4 different levels of engagement. We have the paper transactions, we have the computerized transactions, which have many forms that need to be cleaned up. We have the cleaned up version, and now we have a new system. Correct me if I'm wrong, we have a new system in which we are still hoping to migrate all this information to. And then we'll, at some point in time in the future, have a workable system with less risk of fraud. That seems to be a very drawn out process. And as somebody involved in project management, you must have a timeline, a fixed timeline as to when this thing will actually be in a situation, where we'll actually be in a situation where we have sufficient data that can be easily used to verify applications and applicants, to ensure that the proper usage of the funds allocated to the ministry is undertaken. I'm registering my grave concern that the data entry system, the processes that we are following, just like Member Sipasad, the processes that we are following seems to have no end in sight and have been taken a very long time to get anywhere. And while we are doing that, we are changing the goal, we're changing the deadline as we move forward. Because like I said, we had the paper, then we had the computerized version, then we had the cleanup exercise, and now we have this new process, which we are now in model office stage and still hoping to migrate information. It is a grave concern, and I'm sure to the other members of the committee, that we are not where we should be, at least after 2 or 3 years of trying to do this thing, to resolve the disputes that would have come up. And some of these disputes date back, as you have indicated, many years. But I want to give the floor now to Member Julian John, who indicated that she has some questions she wants to raise. Member?
Yes, Chairman, sorry. Okay, I just have 2 short questions because by and large, other members of the committee have kind of questions that I had lined up. I just want to pose a question to PS Johnson, please. Whether the system of when you of investigation is static. When I say investigation, meaning citizens who are deemed to be in need, is it that they have to apply for these grants, or is they have a system or a team of people or a department even? You see something on the news, can this be triggered by something in the newspaper? Maybe you have a community officer passing by, or is it that the ministry waits on someone to apply for these grants, please?
Chair, our grants follow an application process. So someone will have to come to us to make an application indicating that they are in need of our grants. Now, we do get referrals from our stakeholder agencies like the Children's Authority, the Office of the Prime Minister, the Ministry of Education, and our own Family Services Division and the courts. So they can make referrals of clients. Ideally, what we need to get to in the social protection system is an identification of those people who are vulnerable in our country, and we go to them, as well as identify those vulnerable so that we could attend to their needs in the event that we have the economy. So yes, more work has to be done on the vulnerability system that we employ for our social protection of our citizens. Yeah, and with that is also need for a lot more community service out there in terms of identifying those persons in need.
Yes, Chair, through you again, just briefly. And on a PS, what about the students who are food insecure? I know that came up earlier, but that had to do with people, students who, or children whose parents were not citizens of the country. What about through the school system, where a teacher will know if a child is food insecure? You know, they're not in school with enough, they're not nourished and so on. Maybe the school feeding program is picking up, but I don't know if it's the breakfast and the lunch, but what about dinner? Yeah, I mean, I know it's sometimes a lot for the social security system of the country, but is it that through the school system we pick up on children who are food insecure?
Yes, Chair, we do have a referral system with the Ministry of Education. So the student support services, the social workers in that unit and the guidance officers can refer a family, yeah, to our ministry for support. Yeah, once they identify the need for financial support or some kind of additional psychosocial support. So there is a referral path existing between the Ministry of Education, the Children's Authority, the court, etc.
Very well, thank you, Chair. Chairman, my last question, please. It's just to do with the folks who would have qualified for the grant, the salary relief grant, based on the ministry's terms, and that would have been persons who would have been, well, permanent residents or citizens, and they were registered within the NIS system, and they laid out the kind of people, the fields of employment in which they could have been employed. But there's an informal sector. I said, we can't help everybody, I'm sure you can't, but like a fisherman, I remembered the MP for Mayaro talking about the person who's smoking fish and so on, because these people, they are employed, but the employer will not probably be paying the NIS, etc. But they are no less in need. We have a lot of these people who are farmers, etc. Were they able to access that grant at all? Those who were not within the NIS system as prescribed by the ministry, that is.
Chair, our instructions and our guidelines were to treat with those persons who did not have an NIS number. So we were paying all those persons who did not have an NIS number. So our procedure was to check with the NIS before we make a payment to determine whether that name carried an NIS payment. Once the name did not carry an NIS payment, we would proceed with the validation of the application and the payment. That was our instructions.
Thank you, PS. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, member. A lot of what we discussed just now fell under the food support program. I want to turn to the public assistance grant. I still have some questions with regards to the food support, but in the interest of time and to cover a lot of what are the questions that would have come up, I want to move on to some of the other grants. The public assistance grant in particular, the Auditor General found that some $310 million was spent during the period October 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021. Of that money, 27,715 persons received that grant. So 27,750 persons, 15 persons, 27,715 persons received public assistance grant totaling $310 odd million. And I want to emphasize 27,715 successful applicants or successful persons. But they discovered, the Auditor General has discovered 673,504 instances of blank fields in the database. That's a substantial amount of blank fields, given that 27,000 persons, 27,700 odd persons benefited. Is there, and the question I want to ask, because you've provided, the Auditor General provided a breakdown as to what exactly those blank fields were, and they're substantial, because some of them should have automatically disqualified an individual from succeeding, from the application from going forward, because they were so integral to the application process itself, including persons with ID cards, etc., not having ID card numbers not matching, not having an ID card, addresses missing, etc. The question I want to ask is, of these 673,504 instances of blank fields in the database, did that disqualify persons from not getting this grant? Or is it that persons still got the grant despite those things being missing? The reason being, because I think that there's an example that was provided where somebody applied for a grant. It's provided in the documentation given to us, that somebody applied for a grant, and I think it was 16 persons applied for a grant and didn't get it based on the same criteria that some other persons applied and did get the grant. So my query, just to go back to the query, 673,504 instances of blank fields, but 27,715 persons benefited from $310 million. I want to know if those persons, were not allowed to access the grant because of the fact that these blank fields were missing.
So Chair, we'll explain the blank fields in a short while. But those blank fields are on a database. And as we indicated earlier, data was transferred to that database in 2015 using a model which may have had a lot of challenges. It lacked a validation process. It lacked a peer review process. Now, the manual file, if you go back to the manual file, you would see the ID cards on those files. Yes, because our payment system and the OPAX relationship platform carries a ID card, a name, an ID card, and the amount to be paid. So we are paying the person who you might see here where the ID card data was not on the database system. So it may not be accurate to say that we are not paying we are paying people without ID cards. Yes? Because our payment system is linked to that unique identifier, which is an ID card. I'll let our IT director explain the concept behind 673 blank fields.
Madam Chair. So the original request from the auditors were for the payment files. Subsequent to they receiving the payment files, the payment files don't have IDs nor data birth on them, right? Because it's an extraction from the database that goes for payment, so there's some information that is not on that payment file and wasn't required. The auditors then asked if they could get the IDs and the date of birth. So what ICT did was actually join other existing files that we have in our records that came from the existing database that contain the IDs and date of birth and the application ID also. However, the existing application, when I say application, the existing database, all the fields are not populated. In fact, some of those fields are really, when they were put there, they were never really used, you know. So at that time, the developers had intentions to add other features to the database, but those were never done, right? So the fields did not impact the payment file. So for an example, the file that went to the auditor, there were two fields of IDs. One was populated and one wasn't populated. The one that wasn't populated that came from the system, you know, and one was populated. Also, just as we were saying before, all the IDs and not all the national IDs are not populated on the current database. And that's something that we are working with in terms of the data cleanup, and we have made significant strides in that. So that will account for some. Also, the large number is really a multiplication factor, because the files that were given to the auditor represents a year worth of payments. So if a month one, there were 10 IDs missing, by month 12, it will be 10 multiplied by 12. So that's why the excessive large number of the 673, 504, because it's multiplied by the month. But just to sum it up, applications are done from the local board and are done manually, and payment information is what is transferred to the SSCMS. So the applications will be verified, and that will be done on the manual system. The automated system or the electronic system, the database, just manage the payment, and that payment, as PS indicated, is an update from the OPAC system, which actually does the payments.
Thank you very much. This still raises a bit of a query for me because we were talking about the absence of the national ID card numbers and so on. I think it was the Permanent Secretary that just indicated that some of this data transfer problems can be cited back as far as 2015. We are now in 2022, and we still have situations in which in the last fiscal, in 2020, in fact, it's not the last, it's the fiscal before, we still have instances where in fiscal 2021, which is from October 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021, we still have $886,350 worth of public assistance grants paid to individuals whose national ID numbers do not correspond to their date of birth. And that's a basic thing. So my point being that there still is a problem today. So even if we had this issue from 2015, even if we had issues with the data from 2015, in fiscal 2021 year, we still had $886,000 spent on public assistance grants for individuals whose national ID numbers do not correspond to their date of birth. So that clearing up exercise should not just account for that for this substantial amount of money spent. This may also include new applications. Am I correct in saying that? Or is it that you have a system that is so well functioning that no new applications would have been considered with this particular problem in place?
Chair, so what was done to avoid new applications not having the expected quality? While we are building a new system, we still took some time off to modify the existing system. So what we did, there's a peer review process for new onboarding of clients, where two persons must validate that they have seen the data. So when one person takes the records, and it was asked before, but there is a SOAR flag that shows what are the records that are in the system, and the peer reviewer and the first person who's entering the data must conform to. So we're doing the application that's going to stop it, but we are doing it that day, but that the peer reviewer and the person, that's what they're supposed to do. But if the peer reviewer doesn't conform to what the first data entry person does, the system doesn't allow any further so no grant can be added to an applicant's registration if the peer reviewer hasn't confirmed that the data is accurate.
I take what you're saying, sir. I understand that you are trying to find mechanisms to cross-check and double-check to ensure that no new applications now go forward until they meet all the relevant criteria. Commendable. However, my concern with specific regards to persons whose national ID numbers do not correspond with their date of birth is that this year, that is October 2020 to September 2021, 886,000 persons, $886,000 was spent on public assistance grants for persons whose national ID did not match their date of birth. This is just for 1 year. But if we are saying that from 2015 to now, we have had this migration, this problem then, and if you're saying that we are not correcting it now so that you can't get a new grant, public assistance grant, unless you have all these criteria in place, commendable. But it means that from the period before, from 2015 to now, it is very possible that persons are receiving public assistance grants, not just because their national ID numbers do not correspond to their date of birth, but because something is inherently wrong and or fraudulent with the national ID card number in the first instance. Is that clear? Because if in that financial year we had this much money being spent with persons whose national IDs don't match their date of birth, which should not happen, it means for the year before that, something similar amount of money would have been spent. For the year before that, similarly, for the year before that, especially if you are now putting in place a system which will prevent this from happening for new applications. It meant for years previously, even from the time of migration to now, you would have had a substantial amount of money being spent on the basis of an ID card, which is not match person's date of birth and which may therefore be fraudulent.
Chair, we investigated 61 applications mentioned in this document. They were all human error. And as we indicated in our response to the Auditor General, the matters we did indicate to them that certain things were investigated. Our investigation unit was part of that investigation. And those 61 persons that they provided for us were human errors. There is a lot of human errors in our system. That is not to say, sir, that we do not have, we may not have fraudulent entries. Yes, but we do have a lot of human errors in the current database that we are using.
Accepted, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for clarification. I don't know if my other colleagues have questions and queries with regards to the public assistance grants. If not, let me just springboard of a statement you just indicated. I want to agree that you mentioned earlier that 8 individuals, 8 members of staff ministry were under review of some sort for fraudulent activity. Would it be possible for you to advise at what level those staff members exist at, and whether they are still employed at the ministry or whether they have been suspended or put to different function? I'm referring specifically to the 8 individuals you said that were staff members who would have been engaged or allegedly engaged in fraudulent activity. Let me repeat the question because I went on a bit. With specific regard to the 8 individuals who are members of staff of the Ministry of Services who allegedly were involved or are being investigated for improper conduct in regards to fraud with specific regard to the grants. My question is whether those persons are still employed at the ministry, whether they are suspended or whether they have been assigned to new roles and functions. And what level of staff is that? Are they data entry, junior management, or senior management?
They are from all levels in the organization. We have 4 persons on suspension. We are awaiting the completion of the investigation. We have 3 people at disciplinary level at the commission, and that is ongoing. And the commission had a dismissal recently of 1 person, and those were the 8 that I know of in 2021. As I indicated, prior to 2021, we have persons who have been dismissed and who naturally retired from the system who are under investigation.
And the persons who have been suspended, are they suspended without pay or are they suspended with pay?
They are suspended with pay in accordance with the public service regulations. Those investigations would have to be carried out to determine what instructions the service commissions will give us in the matter.
Thank you, ma'am. I want to move on to the disability grants, if I may. Again, I'm assuming that we are the substantial number of national ID card numbers and date of birth fields that were blank, and those 2 would reflect human errors. Is that correct?
Yes, correct, sir.
So therefore, there'll be no need to query whether any of this $83 million that was disbursed would need to be returned. Or in fact, let me ask the question differently. In all of those cases, to follow what you have said before, in all of those cases where we have national ID card numbers and date of birth fields that were blank, in which payments totaled 83 million, those cases would have been investigated by your good selves and found to be human error. Is that correct to say? Or is it that there were one or two that would not have been human error, that may have been something else?
Chair, many of them were human errors. Our investigation unit is addressing those which may not be human errors.
Can you indicate, ma'am, an idea of quantity that may not be human error? I understand that you cannot be very specific, but just to get an idea of how much of it was actually legitimate in the sense that it was not necessarily fraudulent activity compared to how much may possibly be attracting the attention of the police.
Ms. Francis, do you have any data on that?
I would just say in 2021, we did a sample of 3,009, of which 847 did not match. And when we looked at those that weren't matched, they were found to be errors associated with the EBC. So we found less than a 5% fraudulent or suspected fraudulent activity.
Okay, but that's 5% out of your sample. But the population that you are looking at is substantially larger. So a 5% of a substantially larger population is still going to be a substantially large figure. Has there been any attempt to, I don't want to use the wrong phrase, but to sample the entire population? Because this will, unless directly targeted, will continue until your new system kicks in.
We are in the process, and I think this is more, I should direct this to PS, because yes, we are in the process of looking at doing the entire database.
Yes?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
All right, thank you. If my colleagues have no further questions, I want to turn to the Senior Citizens Pension Fund. Sorry, Senior Citizens Pension / grants. PS, I noticed that the Auditor General complained bitterly that, well, not bitterly, but she did complain, did indicate that while data was requested for the entire fiscal from October 2020 to September 2021, the documents that were provided only were provided for the period October 2020 to July 2021. And therefore, her findings, that's the Auditor General's findings, were only for a 10-month period as opposed to the entire fiscal. Can you indicate why at all this information was not provided to the Auditor General to allow her to do a proper finding?
Chair, that information was available. I do not understand why the Auditor General did not access it. That information is available. Pension is paid for the month on the 1st of the month. So the paid data would have been available. The pay sheet has to be uploaded to the database. And that takes some time because that has to come from our vendor, NIB, in order for it to be uploaded to the database. So that arrives at the ministry closer to the end of the month, and then we input the data, that OPAX data, into the database.
I understand that, Madam Pierce. I'm not trying to incite a war between yourselves and the Honorable Goodley, the Auditor General. However, I'm referencing item 3.78 of the Auditor General's for 2021, which says data was requested for the period October 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021. However, the MSDFS, which is your good selves, provided data from October 1st, 2020 to July 31st, 2021. And therefore, the findings only relate to a 10-month period and not the financial period under review. So it's not necessarily that I understand why it may have happened, but I'm sure you will also agree that there would have been a period between when your cutoff period, as you just described, would have taken place and when the documentation would have been requested and when the documentation would have been prepared and released to the Auditor General. I still am not sure why it was not submitted. I take what you say that there's a time period and there's a gap between when payments are actually made and when the documents come to you. But I'm not sure that that sufficiently explains why there's a period for which the Auditor General did not get documentation. The Auditor General's department is present. I don't know if they would want to fill us in with a clarification or with indication of whether or not they eventually got the complete set of data for 2021. Over to the Auditor General's department. Can you confirm whether you received all the data for fiscal 2021?
Chair, we're verifying our data right now. So could you give us an opportunity to just verify the data and then we will respond to you accordingly?
Sure, thank you.
Just one moment, please. Mrs. Dwarka Ali has the data before her and she will respond. If you may give her opportunity, Chair.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, I said Mrs. Dwarka Ali has now obtained the information and she's willing to give you the information right now. If you would give her that opportunity, please.
Sure.
Chair, we have requested the data for the entire period for the senior citizens pension. However, as stated in the audit report, we only received for the 10-month period, and to date we haven't received for the entire period, which is the additional 2 months. And this data was received in March 2021.
Thank you. So that just highlights the point I was trying to make earlier. And thank you for your clarification, that the data was not provided. Now, the thing is that that data would then, even when provided, would not be audited at the next report of the Auditor General because it will be for a period outside consideration. Is that correct? Sorry?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I would actually love to. You had indicated that the 2 month, the additional data was not provided to the Auditor General's report to date, correct?
Yes.
Now, it means that that data, when provided, whenever provided, for whatever reason it was not provided, that data, when provided, will not form the basis of an investigation for the next Auditor General's report because the Auditor General's report would be for a particular period. And therefore, we would have missed the opportunity to investigate and to look at that 2 month period, even if the information is provided today.
Yes, because we will be doing a follow-up for the 2022 report, and the follow-up, as you rightly stated, would be for the period of October 2021 to September
2022. Madam Permanent Secretary, given what the Auditor General's department has just indicated, can I beseech you to ensure that the additional data is provided as soon as humanly possible? Because this is very basic data. And it's a very basic piece of communication that can go between the ministry and the Auditor General's department, so we don't have this hiccup continuing, and hopefully we'll not have this hiccup in the next financial year. Madam PS, can I have your assurance that you will ensure that that data reaches the Auditor General's department?
Chair, yes, and more importantly, we will have to determine why the data was not provided to the Auditor General, and I would like to ask if it was provided for the other grants. I find it very strange that it wasn't provided for senior citizens pension, and I will undertake an investigation into that.
All right, if I may
Because that
help,
is
if I may help, ma'am, there's no reference, no similar reference for the other grants. So I'm assuming it is only for the senior citizens grant. But I take you at your word that you would ensure that a proper investigation is done to find out as to why. I don't think it is necessarily some malintent, but there's some communication issue there that is substantial because quite a bit of time has passed and lapsed and the information has not been provided. And I'm sure that the Auditor General's department would have made some follow-up queries as well to get the information. So let's try to make sure that this does not happen in the current fiscal. If I am to move on, please. One of the Auditor General's findings was that 18 instances were found where the name field was blank for recordings related to one local board. It may then be that the problem stemmed from the local board itself. My question being, whether when the ministry would have done its due diligence, whether there is a particular problem with that particular local board, or whether it was just a staff member who was a bit negligent. My question being whether some investigation was done with regards to why in that one particular local board, we have had several instances where we had blank field names. Sorry, blank name fields.
And Chair, our investigation revealed that there are in fact some local boards that are showing a lot more errors and inaccurate data than others. And that is clearly related to the size of the clientele in those regions. Those boards have been identified for splitting, namely the Tunapuna board, the Chaguanas board, the San Fernando board, and the Aranguez board. Those local service centers are running in excess of 22,000 clients being processed on a monthly basis. Tunapuna, which is I think is the board here that has been identified, has 29,000 clients, and therefore that has been identified as a priority center for splitting to create an ARIMA board.
All right, I hear you, ma'am. But is it then that the reasoning, the explanation, is it that the explanation that you're providing to the committee is that there was human error because of the volume of work to be done?
That's one of the challenges, sir.
So is it then that adequate staffing should have been put in place to ensure that this does not happen?
That has been one of the challenges as well, sir, and we are trying to work on that in collaboration with the Ministry of Public Administration.
Ma'am, if I am to put you on the spot, can you give me an indication as to what is the level of the staffing that you think is the additional staffing you think is required to have some of these problems not recur? If you're pursuing it with the Ministry of Public Admin, I am assuming that you know exactly how much additional staff would treat with some of these shortcomings. I noticed that you just indicated that you want to split the unit to ARIMA and Tunapuna, which would help, but that should be guided by your additional staffing requirements. So I'm assuming that if you are that far ahead of thinking of splitting, you must know then what the nature of the staffing requirements are that will help you.
Yes, Chair, we have worked out a caseload model that we are going to use. Right now, the Tunapuna board is working, one officer has in excess of 438 cases on hand. We would like to get that ideally below 100 cases per officer, which would mean a significant increase in the number of officers. Our new platform that we're trying to implement come January is adopting a case management system because we are no longer focusing on the payment of financial grants, but rather on the development of the individual and the household, which would require that officers pay greater attention to the family and to use the case management approach in order to develop the family to the extent that they may be independent of grants. It may also mean that the family only want a grant, but they may be in need of other services that would complement their independent living. And therefore we have, as I said, modeled on a caseload of around maybe 100 in the first instance. And therefore the staffing would have to relate to the volume of the client at the local boards and well, now we're calling them service centers.
Thank you, ma'am.
So that is
thank you. If I'm to gather from what you're saying that best practice or acceptable practice should be 1 to 100 clients, 1 employee to 100 clients. And you are currently at 1 to 438 at the Tunapuna Center. Is that correct?
That's an example, sir.
All right. Can you then indicate whether or not you have a similar situation elsewhere in the country in the other divisions where we don't have the appropriate number of staffing, which may also reflect some of the errors that we see here throughout? Is it then that we need to up the staff or improve the staffing in other departments, in other units as well? Well, not units, but the other departments that deal with senior citizens pension? Are you following me, ma'am?
Yes.
In Tunapuna, you established 1 to 438, and you said that a better option or more an ideal situation would be 1 to 100, which means you need to increase your staff role by 400%. My question is whether or not a similar situation exists in other divisions where we may have, even if it's a lower ratio, the ratio still is not adequate for best practice.
And my response, Chair, is yes, we need to seriously look at all the ratios at our service center. We need to look at all the ratios.
Thank you, ma'am. That brings back another concern that we raised earlier. So I just want to throw it on the table now for reference, because if we have data entry issues and we have investigation issues, and now we have staffing issues that actually relate to senior citizens pensions directly, what that points is to serious understaffing or a less than adequate staffing of the ministry in all of these segments that will make sure so that we don't have the same problems that we have now. Just to make that point maybe a little bit tighter, in all of the things that you have identified thus far point to shortfall in staffing or to the possibility that staffing improvement will resolve some of the issues here. Is that correct to say?
Chair, the issue at our service centers point to several challenges. Staffing is but one of them. The issues are also related to training. The issues are also related to the lack of a proper IT system to address our client needs. Yeah. So it is quite a bit of challenges that we are attempting to deal with. And we have been mobilizing all our key stakeholders in support of remedying the situation.
Thank you, ma'am. As you would agree, this ministry is a substantially important ministry because it relates generally to the persons who are at a particular point in time in their life have the greatest need for your support. And therefore, it is critical, since the Ministry of Finance is here, it is critical then to have the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Public Administration, who's not here, expedite the filling of vacancies and the filling of required bodies as would be needed to ensure that your ministry functions efficiently. At least at this point, to ensure that the grants that we are looking at now are not unduly hindered from reaching the places that they should get and the persons who need them most. I want to use this opportunity to appeal to the Ministry of Finance to ensure that adequate funding is provided, and through the Ministry of Finance and through you, Madam PS, maybe you can get a little bit more aggressive. I'm not saying that you're not aggressive, but maybe you can get a little bit more aggressive with the Ministry of Public Administration to ensure filling of the vacancies as are required. I note my colleague, Member Siplad, has a hand up. Member, would you like to weigh in at this point, please? The floor is yours.
I just have one quick question through you, Chairman. Could the PS tell us what was the sum of money paid under the Senior Citizens Grant Program as a reason that were the result of these data inconsistencies? If you have an idea of how much money was paid out.
No, I don't have that information with me.
Would you be able to provide it to us at a later date?
Yeah, we can. We'll try our best.
Yes, thank you very much. Chairman, thank you.
Sure. Just one last question under this particular item, the senior citizens pension. I note that there were 404 instances where check number was 0 and bank account was also 0. But $1.296 million was spent. I'm curious, bank account was 0 and the check number was 0. How paid? How did 404 persons benefit from $1.3 million in effect? If you could not put it into the bank and you couldn't write that check.
Okay, so Chair, the system is showing that we did not pay that person for that month via check or by bank. That's what the data on the data system is showing. But when you go to the pay sheet, you are seeing a valid person with an ID card getting a payment. So this has been investigated. This matter has been investigated. So it has to be an error in the transfer of to the repository.
Okay, I know I said just now, one last question. I have one last question. The Auditor General's report at 3.84 indicated that there was 108 instances were found where the age of the senior citizen pension recipient ranged from 27 years to 64 years. I would like to get an idea of when you did your investigation, what did you find? How do you account for that? How can a 24-year-old or 25-year-old or somebody at that age end up benefiting, especially since you indicated in a previous question that you must apply for these things? How would a 24 or 25-year-old have benefited from a senior citizens grant, a pension, sorry, senior citizen pension?
Chair, at original site, we really thought that this was a fraudulent issue, but on verification, a lot of it is data input errors. Ms. Francis?
Thank you. To you, Chair, we investigated 61 instances thus far of 3.84, and what we found 49 instances of input error. So, for example, if a person was born in 1939, there was an input error of 1993. We still have the others that are under investigation at present.
Thank you. I may have missed the numbers, so I just want to get an idea for clarification. There was 108 instances in which each issue was identified. You said you looked at some. How many did you look at out of that 108?
We looked at 61 out of the 108 so far.
And out of that 61, how many were found to have been illegitimately receiving the senior citizens pension?
We have not found any that have been illegitimately receiving. We were able to clearly identify that 49 were input errors, and we are still investigating the others.
The others. So that means that you still have some 50 odd persons to investigate, correct?
Investigate, yes, sir.
Thank you. I want to move now to the Ministry of Finance, the salary relief grant. All right. There are several questions that were raised, and I think in the ministry, in their response to the provided quite a bit of information that cleared up some of the queries raised. There are two queries. Right. In one of those queries, in item 3.93 on the Auditor General's report, two applicants with a figure totaling $2,500, which they should not have based on the criteria for the grants. They should not have received this $2,500. So that's a total of two persons with $2,500. It may seem as a nominal sum, but it identifies an issue, it identifies a weakness. My reason for the query is in the response from the ministry, from the Ministry of Finance. The response is the NIB, TT, and SRG unit confirmed that these overpayments totaling $2,500 were an oversight. Now, in every other instance, when we have queried here with the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services and with other ministries, they would have identified a solution. So we recognize, in this instance, the Ministry of Finance is telling us, we recognize that it was an oversight. Can the ministry advise whether any action was taken to retrieve this fund, or whether it is just going to be left alone, that it was an oversight and therefore there's no need to consider it further?
Good afternoon, Chair. The Ministry of Finance, we are working along with the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago, who are the administrator of the facility. Currently, the National Insurance Board, they are reviewing the reconciliation of the entire project. And it's only when that exercise is complete, we'll be in a position to definitively say how many persons may have fallen under this category. And at that point, there will be a policy decision on the treatment of these payments.
Thank you, and duly noted. So that means that it may actually be a number than just as two individuals with a $2,500 figure.
I'll be able to say, as I said, the reconciliation process is nearing completion, so we'll have to await the outcome.
Thank you. I note too that the Auditor General has indicated that in the application form, the format for the date of birth field was not standardized across the database, which resulted in a situation where we had persons whose date of birth did not match with their ID card numbers, etc. In the ministry's response to the committee, you indicated that these inconsistencies, when identified, are being corrected by the SRG unit. Is it that an investigation is going on now, or is it just with regards to the 264 instances where the Auditor General identified that there was an error? Is it that it's only those that are being corrected? Are they being corrected, in the process of being corrected, or have they been corrected?
Okay, so there are several points at which errors are discovered. apart from what the Auditor General has identified, also at times members of the public would call in the command center, the SRG command center. They would call in to query the status. It will trigger an investigation where there's missing information or so. It would be provided and the data corrected so that the payments could be processed, as well as the ongoing reconciliation exercise has also highlighted instances where corrections needed to be made, investigation to be done and corrections made.
Thank you. One of the things that was raised as well is that the ministry indicated that the input errors, so your ministry indicated that input errors did not necessarily affect the value of payments made. The query I have is whether those input errors led at all to some persons who may be ineligible to receive the salary grant actually getting it.
We do not believe so, because there were several checks and balances in terms of screening the applications against the supporting documents that were to be provided. So the applicant may have input, data, the dates in an incorrect format, but because we would have had copies of the ID card, we would have been able to corroborate the correct information and process the payment.
Thank you. I know that we have the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Arts here, so I want to turn to them now. I don't want them to feel left out. One of the Auditor General's findings, item 3.102, was that 7 applicants were paid the emergency relief grant twice during financial year 2021, totaling 35,000. Now, I know that an investigation was done. The Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts, in their response to us, indicated an investigation was done, which would clear 6 of those persons. However, they indicated in their response to us that one applicant did in fact receive 2 checks for the period in question, resulting in an overpayment of $5,000. The MTCA notes that this error was likely made as a result of the applicant's name being submitted along with the relevant supporting documentation by 2 different organizations. Now that's fair. So it's not, again, I don't see that necessarily being something that's with malintent. However, it's an overpayment. My question being, what was done to recover the money? Because just like with the other ministries where something was done inappropriately, ministries are expected to take necessary steps for proper use. Can the ministry indicate, or minister, the acting permanent secretary who's here, can you indicate whether any steps have been taken to ensure that the monies overpaid to this particular individual, this particular artist, has been returned to the ministry for proper use elsewhere?
Yeah. Once the overpayment is recognized, the ministry will have taken some steps to correct that it did not happen again. And in addition, in respect of this particular overpayment, it was turned over to the legal department to then actively seek to recover the money related to overpayment.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. It's just that in your response to us, that clarification was not provided, and that would be the logical end to the question. So if you will engage us a little bit, just in fact, it's not indulge us, sorry, a little bit, just indicates to the Secretariat that this in fact has happened, that this payment was in fact queried, and that repayment of the overpayment, for lack of a better phrase, repayment of the overpayment was executed. Would that be possible, ma'am? Just to confirm it?
Yes, yes. We can
Thank you.
provide the further details also.
All right. That's the easy part of it. I want to go back to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. I think we had a bit of a breather, so we can now go back to trouble some more. I promise not to delay you much longer. I know it's a little bit past lunchtime. Let's deal with the income support grant from the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services point of view. The Auditor General at item 3.107 indicated that audit was unable to determine the criteria for the payment of the income support grant under the second phase. The obvious question, I have the Auditor General's attention. Auditor General, can you indicate why you could not determine the criteria? Is it that a criteria was not specified to you to determine how somebody would qualify, how somebody will get a payment, etc. for the ISG?
Chair, in terms of the criteria used for the payment of the grants for the second phase, as we said, at 3.107, we were unable to determine. In terms of documentation that stated the specified criteria, this wasn't produced. The response by the ministry stated that they developed the criteria based on an announcement by the Prime Minister and subsequent public health notices. So we had no documentation to state the criteria.
Right. So I understand that because that's listed in your report. Because this 108, so 3.108 follows from 3.107, which is basically to conclude that due to the lack of information, audit could not determine if the remaining 1,282 applicants who were paid were actually eligible for the ISG based on the criteria related to the last date of employment. So I think there's a question there. I think based on what you have indicated, the ministry's information to you, if this is all that they provided, which was that they developed the criteria based on the instruction of the Prime Minister, etc. That's fine, but no criteria was provided. So that left you in a situation where you could not have assessed whether any criteria was followed because simply you were not given a criteria. So it's not enough with due respect to the ministry, to the Permanent Secretary, to say that you are going to be developing a process and criteria for a grant and eligibility criteria for a grant based on the announcement of the Prime Minister and subsequent public health inspector notices, without providing to the Auditor General the information to verify that those persons who received the grant were duly eligible to receive the grant. Madam Auditor General, can I ask whether or not any such criteria has been provided to your office from that period to now with regards to this specific grant?
No, Mr. Chair, none was provided.
Madam Permanent Secretary, can you advise why no such criteria was provided? Because clearly you would see that in the absence of that criteria, the Auditor General cannot do her job in ensuring due diligence was paid to the provision of grants. And this is for 1,282 grants. That's a substantial amount of persons who would have received an ISG without being, without necessarily the Auditor General being able to verify that they were in fact eligible. Can you, Madam Permanent Secretary, indicate why no criteria was provided? And if it is possible, when such criteria will be provided so that the Auditor General can do her job?
The Auditor General, with these documents in my possession, the criteria did not vary significantly, and this is the advertisement, because the second phase of COVID was restricted to certain sectors. So the criteria used for phase 1 evaluation applied to phase 2. The only thing that varied there was the fact that the sectors to be paid was limited to those identified by the Prime Minister, yes, and the deadline associated with when the cutoff date for the payment, the unemployment, varied from the 2020 phase 1. These documents were provided to the Auditor General's department staff. So again, I do not understand why it is being said these items were not available.
Ma'am, if I may, ma'am, I'm sure that the Auditor General's report would have been a public document for quite a while now, and this would have been specific to your ministry. So I'm aware that you would have been familiar with at least these specific statements coming out of the Auditor General's report. I'm aware that you would have been aware of it before today's session. This is not news to you. This would have been raised and flagged by your ministry as well. Even if there was a slight tweaking of the criteria, with due respect, and I'm not defending the Auditor General, I'm not speaking on the Auditor General's department's behalf, but once a new this is a second phase. If a criteria is not provided, I am assuming that the Auditor General would have requested the criteria, and therefore it would have been a basic thing to say that the criteria has not changed and the only thing has changed is this, but there would have been a communication between yourselves and the Auditor General's department to clarify a situation so we don't have what appears to be a lack of, well, what seems to be a lack of communication between both a ministry and the Auditor General's report, because that works for nobody.
And Chair, I would like to put on the table that I am agreeing that this document was sent by the Auditor General on April 26 to the ministry for feedback on the items raised in the report here. And we did provide a response, including the document. This is the response we provided, and it was sent on May 16th. To a lot of these issues, and included in that response are these documents here. So I am a bit lost as to why the Auditor General is still not in receipt of our response to these queries, including those which were investigated and resolved, in addition to the documents on the criteria. And maybe it is something that we need to have a discussion on, because under the regulations, we are required by law to provide all the documentation required of the Auditor General, and in the past we have done so. And the Auditor General not to leave the office of ministry without the required document. We're obligated to ensure that the Auditor General is satisfied with all that is requested.
So, ma'am, I'm looking forward to the Auditor General's report for 2022, in which I assume none of these matters will be raised again because they would have been resolved. I want to continue, please. I just have a couple more questions. Under item 3.110, there were 6 instances found where the national ID card numbers of applicants were not consistent with the date of birth entered in the database. I'm assuming that you would advise that that would have been based on clerical error. The payments to those recipients totaled 17,500. The part that I want to focus on is, however, 16 applications with the same issue were not paid. This is what I raised before. These applications were filed in the outstanding applications file pending payment. So the issue being that 6 persons were not paid because, 6 instances were found where ID card numbers were not consistent with date of birth and they were paid. 16 persons, 16 applications had the same problem and they were not paid. I'm assuming that that could get resolved, so that's not my issue. My issue is they were placed on something called the outstanding applications filed pending payment. My question then is, what is the status of those applications that have been vested in the outstanding applications filed?
So those would have gone there because they had to be validated, revalidated. In a lot of instances, the phase 2 applications check came in on an online platform that was designed in collaboration with iGov. So we moved from the manual in phase 1 to an online application process in phase 2. The actual validation and the system was built, so once you put a NIS number into the system, you ought not to be paid. You were automatically rejected, right? So subsequent to those coming through the system, those that are not rejected, there was a manual validation process which required the validator to check the data inputted by the client with the attachments provided by the client. And that is where we found a lot of the data entered by the client did not match what the client provided in the copy of the ID card, for example. So those persons here, it would have meant that either the attachment, they might not have been able to see clearly the ID number on the attachment. It might have been reasons like that, that the 16 persons might have been placed on a file for outstanding documents to clearer copies to be provided or something like that. So a proper validation can be undertaken.
Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. That's a fairly comprehensive answer. Thank you very much. I want to open the floor to my other colleagues to find out if they have any other questions that they would like to raise at this time. Before I have maybe just 2 questions before I wrap. Colleagues, do you have any other questions you would like to place to our guests here today?
I don't have any further questions, Chairman.
Okay, so allow me to ask my closing questions. Madam Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, my question, have all applications for grants, and these are questions that would have come from the members of the public, have all applications for grants during COVID-19, have those applications all been resolved, meaning that either the grants have been approved or rejected, or are there still some that are pending?
Chair, we do have approximately 3,000 applications pending. We, as at, what was this date? We had 3,139 applications pending in 2022. We have paid 1,154 under phase 1, and we paid 110 under phase 2. The others are being audited.
All right, now clearly you would see why that would be of some concern to members of the public, especially since these would have been needs-based grants. And we are now looking at a year, in some instances 2 years may have passed between when these persons desperately needed financial support and when they would actually get a grant. Can you indicate which grants these would have been and what kind of timeline we are looking at to resolving those delays?
Okay, so the outstanding ones we have would be for COVID phase 1, and we have, which we have to pay. We have asked for release. As soon as we get the release and the files have been audited, the audit is actively underway. We have asked for the release. We've gotten the cabinet approval recently to make the payment. Once we have the release, we will do the printing of the checks and subsequently advertise on the newspaper to have persons come in and collect their payment.
So you are saying then that the Ministry of Finance is now one of the factors holding you back from resolving this matter?
Yes, we are waiting on that release.
All right. The other question raised by members of the public is, what is the estimate of grant funding lost to fraud during fiscal 2021 and 2022?
Chair,
would you be in a position to estimate that figure?
Made an estimate of that. I don't know if we can maybe come up with a good guess. We have been assuming that it's in some instances we have granted maybe about $50 million. I'm not certain of that figure Chair, because we do not have any system of finding an accurate figure. We might be in a position to determine that when our investigation unit has done a more comprehensive review of the system.
Can you give us an indication of some sort, even general if necessary, as to what kind of time frame we are looking at? Because that's a substantial, 50 million is a substantial amount of money in social expenditure that could be used for other things. I'm sure you will agree. And therefore we would want to target the elimination of that sort of fraudulent activity because it deprives those most in need. But would you be able to give us an idea of a time frame that you may be looking for in which these investigations can be completed so that not just we get a figure, but we can get a determination as to how to eliminate that figure from occurring?
Chair, I will have to revert to Ms. Francis here, but that is a priority for us. Given the volume of records to be considered, maybe she would want to venture a time frame, Ms. Francis?
Okay, let me help Ms. Francis a bit, and in the interest of time, ask that we put that in writing. Is that okay, Ms. Francis?
Yes, we will put that in writing, Chairman.
Thank you. If there are no other questions by my colleagues, I'm not seeing any hands raised. I want to thank all members who are present here today and all of the representatives of the various ministries. I want to thank the representatives of the Ministry of the Auditor General's Department, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts for your participation, and to the members of the viewing and listening audience for tuning in. I thank you all very, very much. At this point in time, the officials will be excused. Again, I thank you all. I wish you a safe, well, you're back and you're still in your offices. So I wish you a healthy and happy, hearty lunch. God bless. Thank you all very much for your participation. Members of the committee, please stay.